Good afternoon to all. I'm delighted to contribute to this Climate Vulnerability Forum Summit, and particularly to this session on an urgent call for a new development paradigm that works for people and planet. And I would like to present three key messages in order to help launch the discussion. The first message is that in the mainstream concept of development that we inherit from and on which largely discussions today are based, wealth creation is still seen as a condition for everything else. And as a result of this dominant development paradigm, we promote trade and investment as a means to achieve economic growth. We tolerate speculation in the hope that resources shall go to actors best equipped to maximize production. We support large corporations in the name of the ability of large corporations to achieve economies of scale and thus to satisfy mass consumption. And both inequalities and environmental degradation are justified as a temporary price to be paid for this process of growth. And we are told that once higher levels of wealth shall be attained, it shall be possible to finance both redistributive policies and environmental measures in order to reduce inequalities and to compensate for the ecological damages caused. I believe we have to question this logic. What we see today indeed is that the means are prevailing over the ends. Increased trade and investment flows, higher levels of resource extraction, the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the largest corporations, while still presented as instrumental in the process of development, as temporary and as reversible, have become, in fact, the ends pursued by public policies in all world regions. Governments have pursued wealth creation, not poverty reduction. They have pursued economic growth, not increased happiness and well-being. They have pursued the quantitative, not the qualitative, the figures, not the people. I would like to submit that environmental sustainability cannot be achieved, in fact, without social justice, and that neither of these two objectives can be achieved without changing the content of development, challenging the model of development that we inherit. Indeed, high levels of inequality, such as those we see today in many countries in the world, are simply unsustainable for four reasons. First of all, the more a society is unequal, the more economic growth is required to improve the situation of the poorest groups within the population. It is therefore in unequal societies that the ecological degradation can be presented as a price to pay for poverty reduction. This is a false dilemma which I personally would like to reject. Secondly, inequality means that resources go to satisfying the tastes of the affluent parts of the population rather than to satisfy the basic needs of the poorest groups within the population. Markets, we should never forget, respond to demand as expressed by purchasing power and the purchasing power of the rich in particular, and they are otherwise not responsive to social needs. Thirdly, inequality is unsustainable also because it encourages unsustainable forms of consumption, driven by status in the infinite quest to mimic the lifestyles of the rich, where what we need, in fact, today is to learn from the art of simplicity and sobriety taught by the poor. Fourth and finally, inequality is unsustainable because it is an obstacle to reform. As economic dominance translates into political influence, in political systems which allow the rich to exercise disproportionate power, the more unequally wealth is distributed, the more difficult it shall become to achieve societal transformation. The fight against inequalities, therefore, should be seen not only as a task of social policies modeled after those implemented in welfare states and advanced industrial societies, it should be at the heart of how the economy is organized. It should guide our choices as to how firms are managed, as to whom pockets the profits, as to which investments are made, as to which technologies are developed. The fight against inequality should form the basis for an inclusive economic system in which social and solidarity economy play a greater role, in which even profit-making corporations are strictly regulated and encouraged to contribute to the common good. A second message I would like to put forward concerns globalization. Globalization, which of course is both the result of technological advances and of political choices to lower the costs of exchanges and communication, to facilitate trade across borders and the free flow of investment. Globalization, I think, is problematic because it has presented one particular lifestyle based on overconsumption and waste as a model to be pursued by all. It has also led to extend the reach of intellectual property rights, although this can result in putting medicines and seeds beyond the reach of the poor in developing countries. And despite the obstacle that IP rights can represent for technology transfers, including the transfer of clean technologies that can help mitigate climate change. Moreover, and perhaps more importantly even, globalization has encouraged a global form of competition in which corporations may choose to segment the production process, to put people at work where employment is cheap, to pollute where environmental regulations are weak, and to declare profits where the taxes are low. As a result of these various forms of social, environmental, and fiscal dumping, governments have entered into a fierce and self-destructive form of regulatory competition. In their anxiety to attract investors or to retain them, they have renounced imposing that workers are paid decent wages, that resources are not overexploited, and that taxes are paid where the profits are made. In the end, all of us lose, except the handful of global corporations that are best equipped to benefit from the race to the bottom that globalization has encouraged. I'm struck by the fact that the proclamation of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 has not led to rethink the current shape of economic globalization. Now, at domestic level, governments are asked to achieve policy coherence for sustainable development. It is now high time that the same requirement is imposed on global institutions. It is time that, rather than promoting free trade and the globalization of intellectual property rights, organizations such as the WTO or the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, work with the United Nations system in order to contribute to a form of development that is truly sustainable and pro-poor. It is time that the international financial institutions that give policy advice support a form of development that is genuinely pro-poor and sustainable, and that they abandon their insistence on imposing macroeconomic policies that prioritize GDP growth at the expense of everything else, and that rely on quantitative rather than on a qualitative understanding of development. It is time, in other terms, that the requirement of policy coherence for sustainable development applies to global governance and to the agencies that shape economic globalization, and not only to states. And my third message concerns the nature of innovation. And the reason I believe this third message is important is because for many years we've been hoping that the SDGs could be achieved by technological innovations. In fact, to a large extent, green growth is a hope that cleaner technologies shall allow to shift to more sustainable modes of production and consumption, and thus to reduce the ecological impacts of economic growth, allowing all populations to adopt the lifestyles of the most affluent countries without crossing the thresholds that endanger the viability of the planet and the future of human civilization. I believe this is an illusion. I believe that technological progress without lifestyle changes is unable to deliver the kind of transformation we need. In fact, under certain conditions, technological progress may increase consumption, an effect known as the rebound effect. In contrast, lifestyle changes that shall move us to simpler and more sober lives are what we need, and these lifestyle changes are prepared by the social innovations developed by the poor. Unlike technological innovations, social innovations cannot be fenced off by intellectual property rights. They are not handed over from scientists and engineers working in large firms to the end users. Instead, social innovations are democratic. They are shared in open access. They are grown organically and bottom up. They do not lead to centralization, but instead to decentralization. They do not lead to the dissemination of uniform solutions, demanding from people that they adapt to technologies that are imposed on them in the name of progress. Instead, social innovations promote and value diversity, the result of the search by local communities of the solutions that are best suited to the particular contexts in which they live. Social innovations do not disempower and they do not result in new dependencies. They are instead empowering and promote autonomy and self-determination. In sum, what I would hope for is for a new model of development that supports social innovation's roles in changing lifestyles, that rethinks globalization so that it serves sustainable development and the needs of the poorest groups within populations, and a type of development that does not see wealth creation as a condition for all other objectives to be achieved. I would like to thank you, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion today.